Open the door!
The daughter of one of the most feared biker presidents in America begged for help, while flames closed in around her. Her teachers ignored her. Her principal
Please leave my
betrayed
office
her.
now.
In the end, the only person willing to run into that fire was a homeless stranger who had nothing left to lose. The next morning, an entire biker club came looking for him, but not for the reason anyone expected. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. Smoke rolled through the empty hallway in thick, choking waves, turning the bright college corridor into a maze of gray shadows. The emergency lights blinked weakly through the haze, casting flashes of red across lockers and classroom doors. A heavy steel door rattled violently. Bang! 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 "Help!" A young woman's voice cracked through the smoke. "Please, somebody." Inside the cramped storage room, 20-year-old Kaylis Rowan slammed both hands against the cold metal door until her palms burned. Every desperate strike echoed back at her, but no footsteps answered. The air grew hotter with every passing second. Flames crept across the floor, feeding on scattered cleaning supplies and discarded cloths. Thick black smoke climbed toward the ceiling, stealing the little clean air that remained. Kaylis stumbled backward, coughing violently. She tried the handle again, locked. She screamed until her throat felt raw. "Please, anybody." Silence. The fire crackled louder. A loud pop echoed somewhere overhead as another light fixture failed, plunging part of the room into darkness. For one terrifying moment, Kaylis closed her eyes. She wasn't ready to die. Not here. Not alone. Across the street, life continued as though nothing was wrong. Cars rolled past the campus entrance. Students chatted as they walked toward the parking lot. A city bus hissed to a stop before pulling away again. Behind a row of restaurants, 20-year-old Kaylin Thorne quietly searched through a large dumpster beside the college cafeteria. Wearing a faded jacket with torn sleeves and shoes that had long since worn through at the soles, he carefully sorted through discarded bags, hoping to find something unopened before the sanitation truck arrived. It wasn't the life he had imagined for himself, but it was the life he had. Some evenings, he was lucky enough to find a sealed sandwich or an untouched container of fruit. Other nights, he went to sleep hungry beneath the worn blanket he kept in a narrow alley a few blocks away. He never complained. There was no one left to complain to. As he reached into another bag, something made him stop. A faint sound drifted across the street. "Help!" Kaylin froze. He lifted his head. For a moment, all he heard was traffic. Then it came again. "We're in here." The words were barely audible, almost swallowed by the evening breeze. His eyes shifted toward the college buildings. Dark smoke curled upward from one corner of the campus. Students near the main entrance were pointing toward the smoke, while security guards hurried people away from the area.
Now.
Keep moving quickly, follow the exit
From
route.
where they stood, it appeared everyone had already escaped. But the voice said otherwise. Kaylin dropped the bag in his hands. Without stopping to think, he ran. He had no protective gear, no training, no guarantee he would come back out. He only knew that somewhere inside that building, someone was still calling for help. At that moment, he didn't know her name. He didn't know she was intelligent, quiet, and carried burdens she had hidden from almost everyone around her. He didn't know that for months she had forced herself to smile while quietly living in fear. Most of all, he had no idea that the frightened young woman trapped behind that steel door was the only daughter of one of the most respected biker presidents in the country. And in less than 24 hours, the homeless young man now sprinting toward the flames would wake to the thunder of 150 motorcycles coming to find him. Hours before smoke filled that hallway, Almost everyone on campus believed Kaylis Rowan had the kind of life most people could only dream about. She was 20 years old, intelligent, disciplined, and carried herself with a quiet confidence that often made strangers think she had never faced hardship. More importantly, she was the only daughter of Darius Rowan, the respected president of one of the largest biker clubs in America. His name carried weight wherever he went. People lowered their voices when they spoke about him. They assumed that anyone bold enough to threaten his daughter would have to answer to an army of bikers. That assumption couldn't have been further from the truth. The people hurting Kaylis didn't fear her father because they never expected him to find out. Running a motorcycle club of that size demanded almost every hour of Darius's life. Between organizing charity rides, handling club business across several states, and mentoring younger members, he was often away from home for days or even weeks at a time. Whenever he returned, he made every effort to be the father Kaylis deserved. "How's my girl doing?" he would ask with a smile as they shared dinner. Kaylis always smiled back. "I'm good, Dad. College has been busy, but everything's fine." She had rehearsed those words so many times that they came naturally. What Darius never saw were the bruises hidden beneath long sleeves, even on warm afternoons. He never noticed the way she quietly flinched whenever her phone buzzed. He didn't hear the silent tears after she locked herself inside her bedroom each night. She protected him from the truth because she knew how much guilt he already carried for being away so often. For nearly 2 years, Kaylis had become the favorite target of 4 wealthy young women, led by Virel Ashcroft. Virel came from one of the state's richest families, and she knew exactly how much influence that money carried. Her 3 closest friends followed her lead without question, laughing whenever she laughed and joining every cruel game she invented. At first, the bullying seemed almost childish. Assignments Kaylis spent days completing mysteriously disappeared before they could be submitted. Books she needed for class vanished from her locker. Someone poured coffee over a research project she had nearly finished. Then came the rumors. Fake social media accounts appeared using her name. Lies spread through campus with astonishing speed. Students whispered as she walked past. Conversations stopped the moment she entered a room. People she had never even met suddenly looked at her with suspicion. When words were no longer enough, the intimidation became physical. One afternoon, someone deliberately shoved her down a flight of 3 concrete steps outside the library before disappearing into a crowd of laughing students. Another day, her backpack was thrown into a campus fountain while dozens of people watched without stepping in. More than once, she returned home with fresh bruises hidden beneath her sleeves. Every evening followed the same painful routine. She would stand in front of the bathroom mirror, gently lifting her sleeve to examine another bruise. Sometimes it was on her arm, sometimes her shoulder. Once, there was a dark mark across her ribs that made it painful to breathe deeply. She would apply makeup if she could, a sweater if she couldn't. Then she'd walk downstairs wearing the same smile her father believed. Darius often looked at her with pride. "I've always known you're stronger than most people, Kaylis." She would force a small laugh. "I'm trying." The words broke her heart every time she said them. Strength wasn't what she felt. She felt exhausted. She felt invisible. Most of all, she felt abandoned by a place that was supposed to protect her. One rainy evening, after staring at another threatening message on her phone for nearly an hour, something inside her finally broke. She looked at her reflection and whispered the words she had been afraid to admit. "I can't keep doing this." Instead of deleting the messages like she always had, Kaylis began saving everything. She took screenshots of every cruel post and every threatening text. She photographed the bruises before they faded. She wrote down dates, times, and the names of students who had witnessed what happened. She even collected damaged assignments and recorded every incident she could remember. She didn't know it yet, but the evidence she collected would later change everything. Holding the thick folder tightly against her chest, Kaylis took a deep breath and walked toward the classroom where her teacher was preparing for the day. For the first time in nearly 2 years, she had decided to ask an adult for help. The next morning, Kaylis walked into her classroom carrying something far heavier than a folder filled with papers. She was carrying hope. Inside the folder were nearly 2 years of pain, carefully documented page by page. Screenshots of hateful messages, printed copies of fake social media posts, photographs of bruises she had hidden beneath long sleeves, dates, times, names of witnesses, damaged assignments, every piece of evidence she could gather without anyone noticing. She believed that once an adult saw the truth, everything would finally change. Her class teacher sat behind her desk, organizing papers before the morning lecture. "Excuse me," Kaylis said quietly. "Could I speak with you for a few minutes? It's important." The teacher barely looked up. "Make it quick." Kaylis placed the folder on the desk with trembling hands. "I've been bullied for a long time. I didn't know who else to tell." She slowly opened the folder, carefully explaining each piece of evidence. She pointed to photographs, read threatening messages aloud, and described incidents she had never spoken about before. Her voice shook more than once, but she forced herself to continue. When she finished, she waited. She expected concern. She expected questions. She expected someone to finally say, "I'm so sorry this has been happening to you." Instead, the teacher sighed as though she had just been handed another stack of paperwork. "Kaylis," she said, closing the folder without looking through most of it. "You're all adults. College isn't high school. Young people argue. They tease each other. It happens." "They're not teasing me," Kaylis replied softly. "They've been hurting me for almost 2 years." The teacher leaned back in her chair. "You need to stop taking everything so personally." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Kaylis looked down at the folder resting on the desk. It suddenly felt much heavier than before. She quietly picked it up, thanked the teacher despite receiving no help, and walked out of the classroom. As the door closed behind her, she realized something had changed. Not the bullying, her hope. The teacher's dismissal spread through campus far faster than Kaylis expected. Someone had talked. By lunchtime, Varel Ashcroft was waiting outside one of the lecture halls with her 3 friends. A slow smile crossed her face as Kaylis approached. "So," Varel said, folding her arms, "you've been crying to the teachers." The other 3 laughed. "I guess you finally figured out nobody actually likes you." Before Kaylis could answer, one of the girls deliberately bumped her shoulder hard enough to send her books crashing onto the sidewalk. Students walked around the scattered pages without stopping. No one offered to help. Varel crouched beside one of the books and smiled before dropping it into a muddy puddle. "You should have kept your mouth shut." The 4 girls walked away laughing. Kaylis remained where she was for several moments, silently gathering the soaked pages one by one. That evening, instead of giving up, she made a decision. If one adult refused to listen, she would find another. She continued documenting everything. The threatening messages became more frequent. The insults became bolder. She photographed fresh bruises. She saved security camera locations where incidents had happened. She wrote down conversations while they were still fresh in her memory. Every new act of cruelty became another page in the growing folder. Days later, she requested a meeting with the college principal. Unlike the teacher, the principal welcomed her into his office and invited her to sit down. For the first time in months, Kaylis allowed herself to believe she might finally be heard. The principal opened the folder and examined it in complete silence. He studied the photographs carefully. He read the messages from beginning to end. He paused over the witness statements. His expression grew increasingly serious. Watching him, Kaylis felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Relief. Surely no one could look at this evidence and do nothing. The room remained silent for nearly a minute. Finally, the principal closed the folder. Without saying a word, he slowly pushed it back across the desk toward her. "I understand why you're upset," he said calmly. Kaylis waited for the rest of the sentence. It never came. The families of those young women have donated millions of dollars to this institution. They funded our science building, our library, and several scholarship programs. He folded his hands together. "I won't risk this school over a conflict between students." Silence settled over the office. It lasted only a few seconds. For Kaylis, it felt like a lifetime. She stared at the folder resting in front of her. "So that's it?" she asked quietly. "Money matters more than the truth?" The principal didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. Kaylis stood, picked up the folder, and walked out of the office knowing she had run out of adults to trust. She didn't know it yet, but word of that meeting would reach Varel before the week was over. And by Friday evening, after most students had already left campus, 4 familiar faces would be waiting for her. The door slammed shut behind her. Friday evening arrived with an uneasy silence that settled over the campus. Most students had already gone home. The busy hallways that usually echoed with conversation had grown quiet, leaving only the distant hum of maintenance equipment from another wing of the building. Kaylis tightened her grip on her backpack as she stepped into the women's changing area beside the sports complex. She almost made it to the exit. Almost. Varel Ashcroft stepped into her path. Her 3 friends appeared a moment later, blocking every direction Kaylis could turn. "I guess you still haven't learned," Varel said with a cold smile. Kaylis took a cautious step backward. "I don't want any trouble." "You should have thought about that before running to the teacher." "And the principal," another girl added with a mocking laugh. For a brief moment, nobody moved. Then everything happened at once. One girl shoved Kaylis hard from behind. Another grabbed her backpack and threw it across the room. Before Kaylis could regain her balance, they forced her through the open doorway of a maintenance storage room lined with shelves of sports equipment, paint cans, cleaning supplies, and boxes stacked almost to the ceiling. She spun around just as the heavy steel door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the empty hallway. Kaylis lunged for the handle. It wouldn't move. From the other side came laughter. "You wanted adults involved," Varel called through the door. "Let's see who saves you now." Their footsteps began to fade. Then Kaylis heard something that made her blood run cold. A sharp, metallic click. The sound of something striking against concrete. Seconds later, an unfamiliar smell seeped beneath the door. Strong, chemical. She looked toward the entrance. Orange light flickered beneath the narrow gap at the bottom of the steel door. The cleaning cloth stored beside the entrance had caught fire. The flame spread with frightening speed, feeding on flammable liquids left behind by maintenance crews working in that section of the building. Smoke poured into the room. Kaylis slammed both fists against the steel door. "Help!" No answer. She screamed again. The smoke thickened. She searched desperately for another way out, but the room had no windows, only solid walls. Outside, the building's fire alarm remained silent. That entire wing had been temporarily disconnected while electrical repairs were underway earlier in the week. No warning echoed through the campus. No evacuation reached the isolated storage room. Across the street, Kalen Thorne searched through a dumpster behind the college cafeteria, hoping to find something unopened before the evening collection trucks arrived. His stomach had been empty since the previous afternoon. A sealed bottle of water and half a loaf of bread would have been enough to make the night bearable. As he reached into another discarded bag, he froze. A voice, faint, barely carried by the evening air. "Please." He slowly lifted his head. Another cry followed. "We're in here." Kalen looked toward the campus. Dark smoke curled above one corner of the building. At the main entrance, security guards were directing students away from the area, believing every classroom had already been evacuated. No one realized a young woman remained trapped in another section of the building. Kalen didn't hesitate. He dropped everything and sprinted across the street. Heat rushed toward him the moment he forced open the nearest entrance. Smoke swallowed the hallway, reducing visibility to only a few feet. He covered his mouth with the sleeve of his worn jacket and listened. Another weak cry. He followed the sound through the maze of corridors until he found the locked storage room. Someone was still alive. His eyes searched frantically. Near the wall lay a heavy steel pipe left by construction workers. He seized it with both hands and swung with everything he had. The first strike dented the lock. The second bent the metal. The third shattered it. The door burst open. Kalis stumbled forward, coughing violently before collapsing into his arms. "There you are," Kalen said quietly. "I've got you." Without another word, he lifted her onto his shoulders and turned back toward the smoke-filled hallway. Behind them, flames raced across the ceiling. Burning debris crashed to the floor, forcing him to change direction more than once. Every breath burned his lungs. Every step became heavier. Still, he refused to stop. At last, he spotted daylight. He pushed through the final doorway and stumbled onto the grass outside. Only seconds later, a deafening crash shook the ground behind them. Part of the roof collapsed where they had been moments before. Kalen lowered Kalis gently onto the ground before falling to his knees, struggling to breathe. Sirens filled the air as paramedics rushed toward them. Medical teams immediately surrounded Kalis, who had lost consciousness from smoke inhalation. Others turned their attention to the young man whose arms were covered in burns. But while everyone focused on the rescued victim, Kalen quietly slipped away. No interviews, no applause, no recognition. By the time emergency workers realized the rescuer was gone, no one knew his name, where he had come from, or where he had disappeared. Hours later, Kalis slowly opened her eyes in a hospital room. The first face she saw was her father's. Darius Rowan stood beside her bed, his eyes filled with fear and relief. Kalis reached for his hand. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I need to tell you everything. If you think the people who ignored Kalis should be held responsible for what happened to her, write "Justice for Kalis" in the comments. Every comment is a stand against bullying and against the adults who choose silence when someone is crying for help. And if stories like this remind you that courage and kindness still matter, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another one. Morning arrived long before the city had fully awakened. The narrow alley where Kalen Thorne slept was usually one of the quietest places in the neighborhood. Delivery trucks occasionally rumbled past, stray cats wandered between overflowing dumpsters, and shop owners unlocked their back doors as another ordinary day began. But this morning was different. A low rumble echoed through the streets. At first, it sounded like distant thunder. Then it grew louder. One motorcycle, then another. 5, 10, 20. Within moments, the steady roar became impossible to ignore. Residents pulled back their curtains and stepped onto balconies, staring in disbelief as motorcycles poured into the neighborhood from every direction. Chrome gleamed beneath the morning sun, while leather-clad riders filled the narrow street until there was barely enough room for a car to pass. The engines finally fell silent. More than 150 bikers had arrived. No one knew why. Some whispered that someone had crossed the wrong people. Others feared the neighborhood was about to witness violence. Instead, every rider remained calm. At the front of the group stood Darius Rowan. He hadn't slept. Everything Kalis had told him in the hospital replayed through his mind again and again. The years of suffering. The adults who had ignored her. The young stranger who had walked into a burning building without knowing who she was. One thought refused to leave him. A man who risked his life for another person's child should never have to face the world alone. Darius turned toward his club members. "We find him," he said quietly. The bikers spread through the surrounding streets, speaking with restaurant owners, maintenance workers, security guards, and anyone who might recognize the description of the young man who had disappeared before anyone could thank him. It didn't take long. An elderly store owner pointed toward the alley behind his building. "I've seen a young fellow sleeping back there for months," he said. "Keeps to himself. Never causes trouble." Darius nodded and walked toward the alley. Several club members followed, their heavy boots echoing softly against the cracked pavement. At the far end, beneath a worn blanket tucked against a brick wall, Kalen was still asleep. The burns on his arms had never been treated. His breathing remained shallow from the smoke he had inhaled. Beside him sat a small backpack containing everything he owned. 2 changes of clothes, an old photograph, a nearly empty bottle of water. Nothing else. Darius stopped a few feet away. For several seconds, he simply looked at the young man. This was the person who had charged into a burning building while everyone else believed it had already been evacuated. This was the stranger who had saved his daughter's life. One of the bikers gently cleared his throat. Kalen slowly opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was a long line of motorcycles stretching down the street. His expression shifted from confusion to concern. He immediately sat up. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "If I've been sleeping somewhere I shouldn't, I'll leave." Darius stepped forward. "No." His voice was calm. "You don't have to go anywhere." Kalen looked from one rider to another, uncertain why so many people had gathered around him. Darius slowly removed the leather vest from his shoulders. It was the vest he had worn for years, carrying the patches that represented his club, his leadership, and his life. Without hesitation, he draped it gently across Kalen's shoulders. The young man looked down at it in disbelief. Darius's eyes glistened. "My daughter is alive because of you." Kalen lowered his head. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I just couldn't leave her." No pride, no expectation of praise, only quiet honesty. For a long moment, no one spoke. Several of the bikers looked away, swallowing hard as they realized the young man sitting before them had returned from a burning building to spend the night in an alley with untreated burns. One rider quietly opened Kalen's backpack. There was almost nothing inside. Another noticed the holes in his shoes. A third realized he hadn't eaten since the previous day. The mood changed instantly. Earlier, hundreds of people had walked past him without noticing he existed. Now, more than 150 strangers refused to look away. One member called a doctor he knew personally. Another arranged a hotel room until something permanent could be found. Several others collected money on the spot, though Darius raised a hand. "Put your wallets away," he said. "I'll take care of this." Within the hour, Kalen had an appointment to treat his burns and smoke inhalation. New clothes were purchased in his size. Hot meals were waiting before he could say he was hungry. Plans were already being made to move him into a furnished apartment where he would never again wonder where he would sleep. Kalen sat speechless as complete strangers worked together to rebuild a life he had long ago accepted was broken. He had run into that fire, expecting nothing. Now, for the first time in many months, he felt something he had almost forgotten. He felt like he mattered. Darius watched quietly as his club members surrounded the young man with kindness. Then he looked directly at Kalen and spoke words that caught everyone by surprise. "This isn't enough." Darius Rowan was grateful beyond words that his daughter had survived. But gratitude alone would never be enough. Someone had tried to take her life. Someone had ignored her cries for help long before the fire ever started. He intended to make sure every person responsible answered for it. Within days, one of the state's most respected law firms was hired to investigate everything Kalis had endured. Their instructions were simple: leave nothing uncovered. The legal team began where Kalis had begun months earlier, with the evidence. The folder she had carried from office to office was no longer dismissed with a careless glance. Every photograph was cataloged. Every threatening message was examined. Every witness she had written down was contacted. Every damaged assignment was preserved. What had once looked like scattered pieces of paper quickly became a detailed timeline, stretching back nearly 2 years. Investigators requested security recordings from the college. Some cameras had captured students pushing Kalis in hallways. Others showed her belongings being thrown away, while nearby students walked past without intervening. Digital forensic specialists recovered messages that several people believed had been permanently erased. Deleted group chats, private conversations, voice recordings, plans to embarrass Kalis, jokes about making her quit school, even conversations discussing what had happened on the evening of the fire. Every recovered message strengthened the case. Witnesses who had once remained silent slowly found the courage to speak. One student admitted she had seen Kalis shoved down the library steps months earlier. Another confirmed that Virel and her friends had repeatedly targeted her between classes. A maintenance employee revealed that cleaning chemicals had been left inside the storage room because repairs were still underway in that wing of the building. Piece by piece, the truth emerged. The investigation soon expanded beyond a bullying. Police determined that the fire had not been an accident. Evidence showed it had been deliberately started after Kalis was locked inside the storage room with no reasonable means of escape.